Okay, so we might as well just get started so that we get
Yep.
the most out of this as possible. And if anyone wanders in a little bit later, they can join in or catch the recording afterwards. Welcome everybody to the closing event for November Writing Month here on the Digital HQ. We're very excited to have three incredible panel members joining us today to talk a little bit more about writing. And a big congratulations to anyone who completed their November Writing Month challenges. So joining us today, we have Sophie Masson, who is a multi-award winning author of over 90 books and the chair of the New England Writers Centre, as well as the publishing director of the Armidale-based Christmas Press. We have Dr. Prashneel Goundar, who is senior lecturer at UNE, a graduate research academic at UNE's Graduate Research School, and has published more than 24 peer-reviewed journal articles alongside 4 books. And we have Ash Taylor, the current programs coordinator for Tune FM. He's a Bachelor of Media and Communications and is currently pursuing a Master's in Journalism, and is also a very avid writer. His short story was published in Fremantle Press's An Unexpected Party. So I think I'll start us off with a general question to all three of our panelists. When and how did you start writing?
Well, if I can start, I started writing really when I was a very small child. I came to Australia from France. As a child, I didn't speak any English or anything like that. And writing was, in a sense, my way of getting into this new language, and reading too, of course. I remember the first book I read for myself in English, which was a little golden book of 3 fairy tales, and I found a copy many, many years later in a garage sale and snapped it up. But yeah, my family's always told lots of stories, and I was just used to stories everywhere, but there never seemed to be enough for me. So I started writing stories, and I've still got a couple of things from when I was a small kid. And I was illustrating my stories then. But I didn't think of becoming a professional writer until I was in high school, because nobody in my family was a writer. I mean, we were surrounded by books. There were lots of books in French and English, but, nobody in my family had ever been a writer. So it took me a while to understand the process of it. And I started by writing actually fan letters to poets whose work I'd enjoyed in HSC English, would you believe? So, and they were so generous, because I actually wrote back, couldn't believe it, that they took time to help a young person, and to suggest ways in which I could actually perhaps further my writing. So it's been a lifelong process, really.
Yeah, I very much the same. I think I actually remember when I was maybe 4 or 5. Obviously, I didn't know how to write, didn't just knew my alphabet, but I would sit next to my nan or my mum at the computer and dictate my stories to them, and they would type it up on Word, and I would go in and just spend the next 20 minutes finding clip art to add to the stories that they'd go and print off. So I had all these tiny little short stories that I just dictated about birds or dogs or things like that. And from there, it kind of grew out as I read a lot more. Started writing a lot in high school and entered a few writing competitions. Did extension to English in my HSC, which involves writing an entire novella, essentially, for that. And just kept writing from there with university and did a bachelor's of writing and publishing. Well, that's the major. And I still write on and off, but it's shifted a little bit in focus to more the journalism side of things. So still very narrative and story-based, but my first love has always been fiction.
Thanks, Jake. I'll share 2 components to it, because I do creative writing and I do scholarly writing as well as part of academic work. But as Ash mentioned about writing in high school, so I took an opportunity. So back home in Fiji, where I grew up, we used to have magazines that used to come out every year, and you could contribute articles to the magazine. So lo and behold, I was having a crush on somebody, and I decided to see if I could write about this person, and I put it in the box for submission. And at the end of the year, it got published, but it came under anonymous because I didn't put my name there. And friends who knew me, they said, "Oh, well, you've written a good poem. It looks interesting." So I started to collect all this. But then when I got to start teaching at the university, I wrote a creative piece. It was called Dying Alive, and it talked about social issues. It talked about elderly in Fiji who were facing a lot of problems. They were not being cared for. And I put the article there. My brother read it and he said, "You should try and see if you can get this published." And the local newspaper, one of the local district newspapers, they decided to publish it. And then from there onwards, it just became going on and on. But the scholarly part of it, I finished my master's in 2014 or so. And then I joined the university back in Fiji. It's called Fiji National University. And I was just looking for things to do. And one of the executive officers, he said to me, he said, "Why don't you start publishing from your master's research?" At that time, we were not well acquainted with journals, ranking, and all of these things. So I just decided to publish anywhere, anyhow. But of course, 10 years down the road, now we know who to send the articles to, whether it be creative piece or journals. But very similar journeys to Sophie and Ash.
Fantastic. I think we're very blessed to have a panel that has experience in all different areas of writing, whether it's creative writing, scholarly writing, journalism, whatever it may be. I wanted to start off with Sophie and ask you a question, because I know that we have some writers in the room who are very keen and eager to get their work published. And in addition to your prolific writing, you also run a small publishing press here in Armidale. You've been on the Board of Management of the Australian Society of Authors, the Board of the Small Press Network. You've got a lot of experience related to publishing as well. So can you give us any insight to how the publishing industry has changed over the years and what publishers today are looking for in debut authors?
Yes, well, the publishing industry has changed a lot, because my first book was published quite a long time ago now. It's been 35 years since I've been a published author. And in that time, we've seen all sorts of things, started off by sending manuscripts by post, I always loved, I hated typewriters. I went from, I started off writing longhand, of course, and then I graduated to a typewriter, but I was just hopeless. I was making mistakes all the time, hitting the wrong keys. So when electronic typewriters and later computers came along, I took to them like a duck to water. Like, I was so happy with them. And so I would type out my manuscripts on my computer, and I would then have to print them all out and send them off in a post in a big fat padded envelope. And then as time went on, obviously that changed, and we started to edit our things on the screen, and now it's all done on the screen. And the manuscript never gets printed out, in fact, because also, they're big fat manuscripts and it takes a lot of paper and a lot of ink and so on. And so that is one thing that's changed. Another thing that's changed is the fact that there was a period like in the 90s and I guess the early 2000s where they were accepting a lot of submissions. There were a lot of different opportunities for authors and illustrators. And then it sort of kind of got restricted. And then it opened up again about 8, 9, 10 years ago. Publishers again started to accept submissions, but this time they were accepting them either through pitch sessions, which were done either online or in person. And like the Australian Society of Authors runs pitch sessions, the New England Writers Centre has run some very good pitch sessions, and we're hoping to offer some more this year. Last year we had one, it was fully online with a publisher in Queensland who was looking for work, and it resulted in a very good strike rate. Out of, I think, about 11 writers. About 4 or 5 got asked to send their manuscripts, and I think at least 2 are going to be published out of that, which is a very high strike rate for publishing. So there's opportunity again, I think, for new writers, for aspiring authors, for beginner writers, but also for, developing writers who've had things published before. There's also one issue which is, a problem for new writers, is that even though there are lots of opportunities to publish in journals, online, in magazines, a lot of it is unpaid. And in the past, you were paid to write things for magazines, for newspapers. And at one time, the papers were paying $1 a word, and usually you'd get asked to write at least 1,000 words. So that was $1,000 straight off, and so you could actually build up your profile through that. And you could also count on having a lot more reviews that are around now. Now, there's some very good reviewers online, in blogs, on Instagram and TikTok and stuff like that. So there's lots of opportunities, but there's very few concentrated places where books can get noticed. So if you do get noticed in magazines and newspapers now, it's a big thing because it really, really matters. So those things have changed. The landscape has changed. At one stage, they were saying, ebooks are going to overtake print books. This is not the case, just doesn't happen. The print book is as strong as ever. In some areas, ebooks do very well, like in romance, for instance, where people are reading a lot of books, like, several a week. But in mostly, audiobooks have become bigger than ebooks in some ways. And it's, I'm very aware of it because it's a format I really love. And I've had several of my books turned into audiobooks. But the print market is still very strong. If you're writing, it depends in what area you're writing into. So children's books is a very big area still. And one of the reasons for that is that you've got new readers coming online all the time, as you were, as children grow up, and then they might leave them behind, but then you've got their younger brothers and sisters coming up, or, then the children of the children and so on. So there's always a market, and but it changes. So you need to be aware of those things. Yes, certainly, if you've been a big reader as a kid, you know the sort of things that you like to read. But look also at what's around now, because, things have changed. Some things haven't changed at all. So kids still love adventure, mystery, suspense. Picture books are still being made. They're beautiful. If you want to write adult fiction, there's a wide range that you can write. So there's crime is very popular, always popular. Romance is also very popular. It's a very specific market. Then there's what they call adult contemporary fiction, which is, it's a mix of commercial and literary, so it goes across a wide spectrum. And then you've got literary fiction, which is harder to get into in a way. And then you've got non-fiction, of course, narrative non-fiction, as well as more scholarly or, more textbook things, educational books. So it's a very big industry with a lot of strengths. So what you need to think about as an aspiring author is, okay, what do I enjoy reading? What do I enjoy writing? Sometimes they're not the same thing, and that's fine. But what do you feel would suit your voice best? And then look around for the different kinds of publishers that there are. Don't just concentrate on the big ones like Penguin Random House or Hachette or HarperCollins. There's a myriad of smaller publishers like us, for instance, Christmas Press. We only publish children's books, but a lot of small press is able to take risks with their books in a way that the big publishers are loath to do because they're very much driven by their shareholders and so on, whereas small press are able to take on books that they like, and maybe, sure, it'll be less numbers, but they are passion projects for them. So don't restrict yourself to just the big ones that you hear about. Look at the wide range of publishers. For instance, you could investigate small press through looking at the website of the Small Press Network, which has a directory of members and which tells you what sort of things they're looking for. So very much it's on to be on the lookout, to be flexible, but to stay true to your own voice. Both things are necessary if you want to keep going in publishing over a long period.
It's a fantastic and very detailed answer. I want to go to you, Prash, because not only do you have experience publishing books, but you have experience, as we've mentioned, writing peer-reviewed journal articles. And I know that there's some of our members who've done, some of our students have done more academic writing over the course of this last writing month. How is the publishing process for academic journals and journal articles different from traditional publication?
Thanks, Jake. There are a number of differences in that if you look very closely into it. The peer review process for different journals differ. Some journals can have sent it out to two reviewers. A friend of mine who recently submitted an article to Autism, he told me that there were four people who reviewed his work. So it can just change. You can have two, you can have three, you can have four. And what happens in that is you have submitted an article. It can only be submitted to one journal at a time. So what you need to look very closely is the guidelines of the journal. So sometimes students actually ask me, how do you find which journal I should submit my paper to? Well, look at your manuscript, what you have written, look at the reference list. In the reference list, you will be able to find those people who have submitted to similar journals. That's one point of contact that you can look for those journals to submit. The other one, there are a number of databases you can search for. One is Shimago. You can search for journals in your discipline. So for example, if you are in linguistics, you can put their language and education, or you can put linguistics, and it will give you a search and it will give you the journals, and then it tells you whether it's an open access journal or whether it's a hybrid journal, and it will tell you the ranking of it. My advice is always look for open access journals if you can, because open access means your work is reaching out to people without subscription, so they don't have to pay anything to access your work, and that in the long run increases your citations, it increases awareness of your work reaching out to as many people as possible. In terms of the whole peer review process, you submit the article in January, it can take anywhere between 3 months to 4 months to 6 months. It can even take longer, because what happens is the editors are going to get the article, then they'll see whether it is of quality that it can be sent out for peer review. So don't get disheartened. This is for everybody who's into this. Don't get disheartened if you get a desk rejection. A desk rejection means they've read it, within minutes or within a week, you say, they have said that this has been rejected. It can be rejected for a number of reasons. It could be rejected because the scope of the journal and your manuscript are not aligned. It could also be that they only have a quota of publishing minimal number of papers, and your paper needs to fit into that category if for them to publish. Now, let's say your paper has gone out for review in the 3 months or 6 months, it comes back to you. So what you'll be getting is the outcome of the review. So they will say either major revisions, or they can say that you need to make some minor changes. They can even at that point reject the article. Generally, after that big review, sometimes they do allow you time to make the changes. You can make the changes, then submit it. So once you submit it, again, it can go out for review. Sometimes you're very lucky that it just goes for one review, and then once you do the major changes, they're happy and they publish it. Sometimes you can be very unlucky. I've been in those instances where it's gone for 3 reviews and suddenly it's come back and it's a rejection. But don't give up. Like, that's the whole part of the process of that. It's very challenging, because when you submit your paper to a journal, remember, as a new writer, you are in the front line with professors as well. So you could be a new writer, but then you have professors who have submitted the paper to there. But it doesn't mean your work is going to be counted less. It's just looking at the quality and then you just hitting that niche area that can get there. I'll give you an example of niche areas. For example, in qualitative research, researcher positionality is something that has started in the last 5 years. And it's a big thing now. It's coming up. Everybody who's doing qualitative research needs to have a section in their paper or in their thesis about it. When I was doing my PhD, I found that I could only find 2 papers on that. So what I did, I started working on a paper of my own on that. And after 2 years of peer review process, it got published in March. And it's my highest cited paper. Within a short span, I've got 30 something citations on it. It's because, that's the area that people don't have access to. They need that information. So the paper is trying to set out how you actually go about including that in the research. So just briefly, I hope I have touched on that, Jake.
Thank you. A fantastic answer as well. I will move over to Ash as we continue on the topic of publication. Ash, you've published an anthology of student works. They were written by UNE students, and you self-published that. What was that experience like for you, and how did it compare to the process of getting your short story published by a more traditional publishing press in An Unexpected Party?
Thanks, Jake. I think the main difference is that self-publishing appears easier to get into. It seems more accessible when you first start, but it's actually a lot harder. It's almost this where the labor is distributed. So in a traditional publishing, and I'm sure Sophie can speak a bit more on this as well if we have time, traditional publishing, you're often sending the manuscript through, it goes through that whole approval process, and then they'll send it back and go, yep, we'd like to take this. No, we don't want to take this. Here's why. Sometimes they don't even tell you why. But when I submitted my short story, The Boy and the Witch, to An Unexpected Party, it went through a couple rounds of editing. This was actually the second anthology it had been accepted into, but the first one fell through and didn't end up getting published. So it was already quite polished because it had already gone through rounds of editing from that one. And then it went through a couple more rounds of editing. And what that looked like was their editor, Seth Malakari, sent it back with the revisions and said, this is what we'd like changed, yada, yada, yada. We worked through that. And that was pretty much all I had to do, with the addition of just send through an author photo and send through an author bio. All the rest of it, the cover art, the promotion, the actual upfront costs of things like the ISBN, all that was handled by the publishing company. Comparing that to when we published Fusion, which is what we called it, the student anthology from last year, we had to front all of those upfront costs ourselves. So we had to pay for the ISBNs. They're not cheap necessarily. They can be if you buy them in bulk, but they're still like a few $100s for depending on how many you purchase. And you need, if you're getting an ebook and a print book, they need to have separate ISBNs as well. So that's an additional cost there. In this case, we had the competition involve the process of creating a cover art for it. If you didn't have access to cover art, you would be potentially paying someone else for the cover art. In which case, that would be another extra $100 or so. You might have to pay someone else for editing. I edited this anthology myself. I've got some experience from doing the units at UNE. But really, when you're self-publishing, all of that nitty-gritty labor is on you. You have to do the formatting and make sure it's the right formatting. You're in charge of doing the advertising, creating all of that hype, that buzz. You're in charge of making sure people get advanced reader copies if you want to do that. You have to have a much stronger social media presence if you're trying to sell the books with the intention of making money. In this case, we were doing this for the students. We were doing this as a passion project. It wasn't about making an earning on it. But if you're a writer who wants to do the self-publishing route, really, really look into how much it's going to cost you. It might be more accessible because it's a lot easier to have a book that you can hold afterwards. But you have to pay for the copies to be printed and sent out if you're going through somewhere like Ingram Sparks, which is probably sort of the forefront of the self-publishing industry right now. You can go through places like Amazon and Kindle as well. I think it's just weighing those pros and cons. I was certainly very fed up with the process of self-publishing after I'd completed it. I was like, okay, this is a lot. This is hard. I've had to do all of this. It might be a bit easier if, say, you have the capital to pay someone to format, to pay someone to edit, to pay someone to do, the cover art. And I'm sure those services exist out there. So I guess it's just weighing up do I have the mental fortitude to potentially withstand rejection after rejection after rejection? Because that can happen and it can be disheartening. Or do I have the budget up front to actually do a run of these books and to get all of the services that I need? And having been through both, I think I do prefer the traditional publishing route. I do think self-publishing has its place, and more people are self-publishing these days. It is easier with things like Amazon and Kindle to get access to self-published books. And I think recently a self-published book actually made it onto the shortlist of a big award, which was a massive thing for that sort of industry. But I do think I personally prefer the traditional publishing route, even if it does entail getting no, sorry, this one doesn't fit. No, sorry, this one doesn't fit, over and over again.
It can be tough to handle that kind of rejection sometimes. But yeah, thank you for your input, Ash. I am a little bit wary of time because I know that Sophie needs to go at 7, and I want to make sure that our audience has an opportunity to ask questions if they have them. But I will ask one more thing for all three of you. What is one major hurdle that you had to overcome when you were getting published for the very first time, and what did you learn from that?
Yeah, well, for the very first time, my big hurdle to overcome was I knew absolutely nobody in publishing. I knew nothing about the publishing process, really. I just knew that, I wanted to be a writer, and I kept an exercise book with the things that I was sending out and the results. And like Ash, I got masses of rejections. I had these columns that had rejected or taken, whatever. Rejected was like by far the biggest. A lot of citations on there. And so that my biggest hurdle was actually to get people to actually read me, and my first 2 books that I wrote never got anywhere. And it was the third one that I wrote, my third novel, which got through. But I had to wait a year to hear back from them. And honestly, I thought that they had completely forgotten about me or chucked my manuscript in the bin. And when I got it back in the mail, I thought, oh, okay, they've just sent it back to me. This was the University of Queensland Press. And I almost just put it in my bottom drawer. And I thought, oh, look, I'll open up the thing to see, because sometimes they would say nice things, that were kind of encouraging. And it said, look, we love your novel. We want to publish it, but we want you to do this and that. Oh, my God, So it was like the hurdle was really there wasn't all the infrastructure that there is now, which is there to inform writers. Yes, we had publications like the Writers and Artists Yearbook, which was quite useful, but there wasn't all the many workshops and all the writing groups and the information that was out there is out there now. And the opportunities, so for instance, self-publishing and so on, as well as other ways of getting into the industry. So that my biggest hurdle was ignorance, I suppose, and my biggest asset was absolutely determination to get through and not to take it too personally when I got rejected. And having to have the patience, I'm the most impatient person in the world, and to have to learn patience was a big thing.
I guess, yeah, I'll jump in. I'm nowhere near as published as Sophie or Prash. I've got experience in publishing things for newspapers online, in which case that's pretty much send it through and they'll either yay or nay it. I've published things on blogs, But I think the main thing for me personally is just a lack of time to sit down and continue practicing. In order to be published, you need to be writing consistently. You need to be writing a lot of things all the time and constantly improving. And that can be really hard if you're not super dedicated to actually having that goal. And I certainly got a bit discouraged. I've gotten discouraged again with another short story that I'm trying to send places, where it's a lot of, we really like this, but it's not a good fit, or this one, it just didn't hit the right tone for us. And that tends to come back. And it's really, really easy to get knocked down. And I think for a lot of people, myself included, that is the biggest hurdle to getting published, is getting knocked back and feeling discouraged from it. But then depending on the genre that you write in, there can be oversaturation of the market. And then, people be like, well, we've already got these 5 other books that are in the same genre. We don't want another one, particularly if you are writing genre fiction, for example.
In my case, the biggest hurdle was actually not having enough publishers, because I was an academic in Fiji and we only had 2 publishers. So you either get in this or you don't get in this, and you get in the other one or you don't get in at all. And it was a nightmare, because writing the proposal and trying to persuade people to get it published. So what I did another route. Ash talked about newspaper articles, but in Fiji it was so difficult to even get newspaper articles in the national newspaper. So the district ones would be fine. They would be able to take your article and publish it. But then when I started sending it to the national newspaper, for 1 year, none of the articles were published. For 1 year, no one acknowledged the email to say that they actually got the article. So what I started to do, I said, well, I'll keep on trying my best to try and balance both. So I tried with the district one, and then somehow the national newspaper was able to recognize that, okay, this person can write, and they published an article, and kept all those as a collection, and then I published it as a book in 2017 or something like that. And again, that was the biggest hurdle, not having enough publishers. So when I did manage to persuade this one publisher to go ahead with the book, it took a lot of effort in that. But what I would say the biggest hurdle is not just that you're not able to find a publisher. The other one is to keep yourself motivated to keep it going. Like we've all of us have talked about rejections, but if we sort of just were holding on to that rejection, we wouldn't be sitting in this panel today, right? So the whole idea is that you overcome all of that and know that somewhere somebody will accept it.
Jake, you're muted.
Thank you. 3 incredible answers. I want to open up the floor for anybody to ask any questions of our 3 wonderful panelists just before we hit 7 o'clock. If you are with us in Gathertown and you'd like to ask a question, you can do so by coming up to the pink megaphone square at the front of the, what do we call this, an auditorium, I suppose?
A library.
A library, yes. So feel free to come forward to the pink square if you do have a question for any of our 3 panelists. But in the meantime, if we don't have any, Casey looks like she's making a move.
Casey, you're muted as well.
So sorry, are you guys able to hear me now?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, we're all good.
Oh, okay, sorry. Oh my gosh. This is a question not to really anyone in particular, just anyone who's able to kind of speak on the matter. I think in terms of publishing, even if I was looking at some point, I think I'm really frightened of the idea of it taking the soul out of what you're writing and kind of going through that editorial process and it taking away a lot of what you really are passionate about when you're writing. And so I think I just would like some sort of insight from you guys who have been through that process and had the kind of rejection and needed to change things, like what it feels like to need to change your work that you really are passionate about.
I think if you have an editor who makes you feel like they're taking the soul out of your work, they're a bad editor. A good editor is someone who works with you to tell the story that you want to tell, and their work, and this is something that I learned at uni in the publishing units, is that a good editor should be invisible. They're there to guide you. They're not there to insert their own thoughts or, opinions into it. But I think Sophie's got a bit more experience in that and can probably talk a bit more about it.
No, but you're absolutely right, Ash. That's exactly right. A good editor is one who loves your work and is going to work with you on it to make it shine as much as possible. And to have that eye on there of somebody who loves stories, who understands them, who understands your work as well, because they have agreed to edit your work, is something absolutely fantastic. I've had the most wonderful experiences with editors. There's only been one time when there was an editor who was a bit too interventionist, and I basically said, no, I'm not doing this. And you can do that, it's your work. It's obviously, sometimes you feel, even now, I think, why have they put that comment there on the screen? They don't understand what I'm trying to do here. But then I realized that I have it in my head clearly, but it hasn't come through on the page for that other person's eyes, so it's like if you get, say, one of your friends or somebody, a writing buddy or somebody who looks at it, you might say, I don't quite understand this bit there. It's because the act of connection hasn't quite happened, and a really good eye can help you to make that come into full spotlight. I think the really good editors, they are often writers themselves, actually. They often do it freelance, or a lot of the people that I've worked with have worked for publishers and then they go on to write their own books. So it's very much, if you're working with an editor, it's nearly guaranteed that you're going to have somebody who's going to be respectful of your work and who wants the best for it and for you. So I think, and when you really have something that really, really you feel strongly about, you should speak up and say so. Don't feel that because they're the editor and you've been taken on by this publisher that you have no voice anymore. You do. You have a very strong voice, and you can make your feelings quite clear, respectfully, of course. But if you can explain to the editor, okay, I did it for this reason, I've written it this way because of that, this particular aspect, then they can say, well, it hasn't quite come through, and then help to actually make it come through. Or else I can say, oh, I see, okay. And maybe they hadn't realised, but once they reread it, they saw it. So really, like I said, basically, a good editor is never going to impose their will on you.
Casey, my suggestion is always that if I have if I have got a manuscript ready, it might be just an article of 2,000 words or something like that. I have two friends I send it to before I send it anywhere else. And the two friends are two different characters. One is exceptionally brutal. She's not going to tell me, oh, this was very nice. She'll be like, why is this here? And I remember I published a newspaper article and she wrote to me, she said, are you not looking at the flow? Your article is not even flowing properly. So it's good to have friends like that. And then I have another friend who's very meticulous about punctuations. And he is really good in looking at punctuations, because when I blurb, I just keep on going wherever and I don't know sometimes. And they look at that. Now, Sophie and Ash have talked about editors in terms of creative works. Just Jake, if I can talk about reviewers and editors of journals, they have sort of the similar concept as well. They can come back and say, well, why have you written this? The reviewers have suggested that you can change this. Even in that, you can fight back. Even in that, you can argue. So sometimes we write back and provide a justification. No, this is what our article is trying to address. So if we bring in the other element, it's going to completely change the article. So not only in creative works, even up to scholarly works, you can always have that voice and always say that, no, this is what I want.
Thank you all very much. They're fantastic answers.
Great question.
Great question. Thank you, Casey.
Yeah.
Once again, if anyone else has any questions, feel free to come on up to the pink square at the front of the room. Yep, we've got Chloe.
I think it's kind of a really basic question, but how do you guys deal with writer's block? When some of you obviously work in writing as well as doing it outside of work, how do you kind of balance still wanting to write when it's become your job?
I don't do writer's block. I don't have writer's block. I've never had. If I find that I feel a bit stuck in, say, a chapter in a novel, what I'll do is I will set it aside for a bit, and I will try to work on something else, like a picture book text or a poem, something short and different, or an article, which will engage my brain in a different way. And often I will find that that is refreshing enough for me to go back later, like a day or two or a week later even, to the thing and suddenly realize where I need to go, because basically it just means that a particular aspect of my brain needs to have time to work something out. And I think that's what a writer's block is really. It's really, you need to give your brain time to process where you're going to next. And if you're able to just set that particular thing aside, the thing that makes you feel blocked, and work on something else. And it could be something really simple, like, for instance, you could try your hand at writing a nursery rhyme, or a little, what about a little ad, or anything, which gives you the sort of writing exercise, but it doesn't actually make you feel afraid or make you feel anxious about tackling something. And I think because of the way I was brought up, I guess, in a way also, I had the thing of, like, my parents were very strict about a lot of things. They let us read as much as we wanted and whatever we wanted to read. But, we often had to be quiet, like at dinner time and stuff like that. We weren't allowed to talk. And there were things like, sometimes there were long, boring periods, and I would sort of stare at something, like on the wall, or even an ant crawling across the thing, and imagine something about it. And that would actually give me an idea for something else. So it gave me a way of working through certain things, and I still do that now, So I will be sitting in town, and some people going past, and I overhear a conversation. I think, oh, and then sort of your brain sort of goes off, and I wonder what they're going to do next. I wonder what this means exactly. I've heard some truly strange things, because you're only getting snippets of conversations out of context, and so those kind of little mental exercises, they help to break the anxiety up, and the feeling of being stuck, because everybody can experience that. And as I say, I don't do writer's block as such, but there are moments when I feel stuck, often in the middle of a novel or something. And I think, oh my God, so how am I going to get to the end here? So then I go off and do something different, just to give it a bit of a refreshing exercise. I don't know if that helps.
Thank you.
I find that when I get writer's block, it's because I put too much pressure on myself for it to be perfect the first time around. It has to sound good, and I will get stuck in the flow of a single sentence and change 3 words around consistently until it feels right. And that's what my writer's block usually looks like, which makes it really difficult because, as anyone knows, the first draft is always the worst draft. And I think the easiest way to get over that is to just let yourself write badly. And I don't mean like, writing and not worrying about how it sounds. I mean write like actually badly. I mean this person and that person did this and that, and then they went and did this other thing, and that's actually the full sentences that you've just wrote. You've got that script down, and you can go back and you can go, okay, this is what I actually wanted it to look like, but it's there now. I know the process of getting them from point A to point B. I know the very basic skeletal structure of it, and it can be dot points. It can be the worst summary of a scene that you've ever written, but let yourself write it badly, because they're words on a page. They can be deleted. They can be changed. They're not set in stone. You're not, back when you're chiseling into a clay or stone tablet or something and having to throw the whole thing out. So just let yourself write badly.
Chloe, this is not an answer that you might be expecting, but I'm the laziest writer you will find because I love reading, and I just get into it, and I would be just reading and reading. And that makes me go into the path of procrastination. And I know I have these things to write at the back of my mind, but I'm reading a book, a linguistics book by David Crystal, and I'm so touched by the way he has written it. So I'm always into that. And then by the time I'm midway through that, I've already got 3 books lined up, right? So I do agree with Sophie in terms of like having those things. So what I do is when I get into it, I can be lazy at writing, but when I actually get that particular sort of light bulb going, I'll just churn out words and words and words. But I don't edit my work at that time. So what I do is I just let it flow as much as possible. And then when I actually have writer's block, that's when I go and edit the words and then just say, oh, that's the spelling, or this is what that needs to be done. So when I edit it again, sometimes it's like, oh, I just thought of this sentence. Let me go back to the top and then put one sentence there. So that's how it helps me to get over that laziness. But like I mentioned before, the motivation is that you just have to keep it going. A book I read a long time ago, Think Well, Think Well and Write Well. And one of the points that the writer had said that every day, if you make it a habit of just writing 20, just start off with writing 20 words a day, it can increase from 20 words a day to 200 words a day. And then it can, in a week, you have 1,000 words written, right? So that's a lot of progress to be made over that week period. So try and see if you can make it an actual habit of doing, just start off with 20 to 50 words and just just the target. And another way of getting over writer's block I have seen is that what works best for you in terms of time. Are you very active in the morning? Are you very active after lunch? Or are you very active in the night? Choose that time that you are functioning very well, and then use that period to write. For example, like I'm very active in the afternoon because I feel that my whole work day has sort of gone past, and this is the time to sort of distress myself. I'm quite relaxed, and then I start thinking about, and then I put notes there as well. The last advice for writer's block is just make points as you go along. So, for example, you know that you want to write about AI taking over the world. Just an example, it won't. But what you do is then you have made 5 points somewhere. Forget about it. You have heard someone else talk about it. That clicks a light bulb. Put those points in that running document that you have. Then come back when you are really motivated. You have had a good lunch and you just know that, okay, I can write from this one word that I have written or 3 words I've written, I can write 10 lines. Go for it. So all the best, Chloe.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Chloe. We have 5 minutes left until 7 o'clock. Does anyone have another question for the panelists? Casey.
If anyone else has any other questions, like I don't need to ask another one. So if anyone else needs to ask one, please come forward. I don't want to take up more time than I need to. But Sophie, I just wanted to put this question to you. I think one thing that I'm really struggling with when writing is kind of finding a way to give each character an individual voice and kind of make them feel like an individual person and kind of give them that personality. And so I just wanted, if you could kind of touch on that and how you find kind of characterizing different genres of people and things like that?
Yes, yeah, that's a very interesting question, and it's a very good one. So it's basically I tend to have a very visual and auditory experience with characters. So I can actually hear them talking and to each other, and I can hear the different tones of voice and things like that. But that's only after I've visualized them. So I often say, it's like when you first meet someone and you can see that what they look like, you can hear their voice, you can do that, but you don't get to know them as a person until you've met them a few more times. You start to understand something of their background, their liking, and so I build up a picture of those characters, and I do that with my notebook as well. I just write those in longhand, just little snippets, brushes the hair on the side. I mean, because sometimes you do things about physical stuff too, or has a deep voice. Somebody likes such and such music or whatever. And so you build up this kind of character over time, and over, sometimes it's over a few hours even, or over a few days or whatever. And then I start to hear the dialogue between them, and I start to feel the atmosphere between the characters. And that's when I start to write dialogue, I always try to say it aloud. Is when the characters first make their entrance in the novel, I say it aloud to myself, or else I even record myself speaking the dialogue, because that will also tell me the things like, for instance, the pauses in their language, the way that they use language. Are they using it? Are they speaking fast? Are they speaking slow? Do they have some kind of accent? And if so, what it is? And do they are they listening type of person, or they're a chatterbox or whatever? And all of that will help to distinguish each character. So it's very much built up from notes and from reading aloud certain bits of dialogue, particularly from the start, And what I like doing with the books I'm writing at the moment, which are my adult novels, I've been writing the first chapter as so the three main characters, and each of them has a section in that first chapter. So you first come to meet them in that chapter, and you also get to hear what they sound like, in a sense, and what some of the backstory is. Not much. I only put a little bit of backstory in the first chapter, but then it helps me to ground each of them in a chapter, because after that I do a chapter for each main character, even though their stories are interlocking. So it's, if you can do that, if you could even write like a little sample chapter for yourself with introducing your characters to each other, almost as if they were at a party and we're introducing them in real life or something, you will somehow, you get a sense of who they are, and you get a sense of how they will respond to each other and how they'll talk, which is one of the most distinguishing ways in a novel. In a visual medium, you'll be able to see them. In a auditory medium, like an audio book, you will get to hear them. In a novel, you get to see and hear and get let into their inner thoughts as well. So, yeah, it's difficult to, at first, to try and distinguish them from each other. Certainly when I was starting out, that was one of the things I had the most trouble with. But I got to learn that kind of process, which is almost like acting it out, or like being a director of a movie, and you're sort of instructing the actors how to play it. I don't know if that helps, but I think, writing down a little sample of each character that you've, already thought about, then you find your way into their portrayal more easily.
Thank you very much. And if either of you have anything else to add, please feel free. I don't mean to close the question off or anything like that. Thank you very much.
I think Sophie's right. I like to find something specific about a person. Maybe one person doesn't use contractions, They always say do not, cannot, will not. Maybe someone else trails off in the middle of sentences. Just finding something unique about the way they speak and going with that.
Thank you very much.
Fantastic answer. We have hit 7 o'clock. I believe, Sophie, you said you had to.
Yes.
head
I'm
to the
sorry.
bus.
I mean, I could answer. I'm happy to stay for another 5 minutes or so. But if anyone wanted to ask anything or else, I mean, yeah, just leave you to your wonderful conversation. I'm sorry I can't stay longer.
No, that's absolutely fine. Does anyone have any final questions specifically for Sophie that they would like to ask before she has to leave? No? Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Sophie. I'm sure we all really appreciate having your expertise in writing and in publication. It's very enlightening and I'm sure very helpful for everybody in this room who is aspiring to get into writing. So thank you so much for coming along.
Well, look, it's a pleasure, and thank you very much for inviting me, and many thanks to Ash and to Prash too. It was really interesting to hear what you had to say, and it's interesting how well we dovetailed, in fact. And thank you very much, Casey, and everyone else who asked questions. And yeah, thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much, Sophie.
Have a great evening.
Thanks, Sophie.
Bye.
In the meantime, we still do have Ash and Prash here with us. So if anyone has any questions for Ash or Prash, once again, feel free to come up to the pink square. I do have a bit of a question, and it may be a controversial one, because I heard a buzzword a little while ago, which is the wonderful AI. There's a lot of question marks over what role AI is going to play in publication and what it's going to mean for writers and publishers going forward. And I was just wondering, both from an academic and scholarly work standpoint and in publishing works of fiction, what do you think AI means for prospective writers going into the future?
I mean, I'm happy to throw my opinion out there, is that I don't think AI is going to mean anything. Sure, it can scrape things, it can steal content, but it can't actually tell a story because it doesn't have human experience. It can write something that sounds okay because it's a language model that's learning based off what other people have written, but it's not going to ever really create anything entirely new. And you can pick it, and it's boring to read because it all sounds the same. And it's not to do with the punctuation it uses. It's just the fact that it's a language model that spits out the same generated thing using a template. In terms of editing, maybe it's a little bit more useful with spell check, but I feel like spell check has also gone downhill recently. I keep getting things being like, oh, did you mean to say this? Or your audience might not appreciate you using naughty words like swear words in your script, which I think is ridiculous. But what actually does concern me is the sheer amount of people using it to make a quick buck, getting AI to generate a really terrible novel or short story or something, and then putting it up on Kindle for like 99 cents and giving it an enticing sounding title and summary, and then people go and buy it and then find out it's AI. And it just, I think the hype is going to die out eventually, and I think people who are confident in their writing skills don't need to use it.
Thanks, Jake. That's an interesting one because journals now, what they have, if you are submitting a paper, they have a checkbox somewhere where you have to tick and say, if you have used AI in this, they ask you to write a statement to say how you have used AI in that one. Like I don't use it to write papers, what I do is I do use AI in the sense to just get my thoughts together or just to get a background check or something. But it shouldn't be used or shouldn't be reliable. We shouldn't rely on it. A colleague of mine, he had no idea how it worked. And I showed him, I said, okay, well, let's put on just to get an idea of a language policy in Fiji. And they quoted me and they gave references of books which I have not published. And I said to him, I said, it is trying to get all these different writings that I've done, and it's trying to throw back and say that this is a book published by Prashneel Goundar. And I said, I haven't published that book. But those are fact checks that you kind of need to do if you're using it even just for the planning stage or things like that. But as Ash said, like, we have to sort of be very ethical in the sense that you don't expect it to write a whole paper. People might be doing it in some countries, but you being invited to then give a talk later on that paper, are you confident you'll be able to do it? Written work can be fine, it can pass, but then when someone is actually going to ask you questions, that's where logical thinking that AI doesn't have, you have. So how does that then work? So I think it's all about using it as a tool when required, and like Chloe mentioned writer's block. So sometimes we can also have writer's block in terms of thinking about, okay, how to start this particular paper or how to start this particular narrative. It can, if it tells you a few things here and there, then you just move on to your own, but just try and keep those to a minimal. That's what I could say.
I think Sophie had a similar, because I spoke with Sophie about this before, and I think she had a similar experience with you, Prash, in that someone had asked AI about her, and it said that she had written this biography of a man that she'd never even heard about, and this person actually went and contacted her and was being like, oh, I'm trying to find this book that you wrote on whoever this guy was, and she was like, I've never written this book, I don't even know who this is. But you make a really salient point about not being able to talk about your work, because I actually was reading a post from someone recently who knows someone who works in book publishing, and they were saying that they actually get a lot of AI-generated content submitted, but what distinctly marks the difference between human writing and AI writing isn't necessarily the style, but also about the fact that a real author, someone who's sat there and written the story themselves, can talk about the story. They can elaborate over characters, over details, over the plot, and they can explain why they chose one particular choice or one scene over another, and they can explain the thinking behind why a certain character did something. But AI can't do that. And if you've got an AI to generate a story, you also can't do that because you haven't done the decision behind it.
Great answers. I think very reassuring answers as well for everybody in the creative fields who is hoping to get published or whatever your goals may be. It's good to hear that at least there's safeguards in place, and hopefully that will remain to be the case. Does anybody have any questions for either of our panelists? Chloe.
Hiya. This is specifically for Ash. How has working at Tune kind of affected your writing and vice versa, in terms of working whilst being a writer?
I'm doing a lot less creative writing than I used to because the skill, so for people who don't know, I am the programs coordinator at Tune FM, but I also do a lot of news writing and voice pieces. And the difference between writing creatively and writing for radio is that you have 30 seconds in radio to tell people the facts. So it is short, sweet, and to the point. You don't have the time to get fluffy with it. You don't have the time to describe how someone's eyes sparkled as they thought about something that they're going to do, or the way the wind, blows through the trees. You have to go, this many trees fell down during a massive storm, cutting off power to this community for 48 hours. SES is on the ground right now. and then you cut to a grab of someone going, yeah, this is really difficult, we feel bad for the community, blah, blah, blah. When you're doing long form, you have a little bit more leeway, but it's still more in this style of back and forth. News writing has its own template to it. You've got it's very much like essay writing of the who, the what, the why, the how, the when, but you very rarely, unless you're specifically writing narrative journalism, you're there to say the facts. You're not there to put opinions into it. You're not there to make it, emotionally devastating or uplifting. It's really just about, this is what happened, here's why it happened, here's why you should care, this is what this person has to say about it. Unless you're doing narrative journalism, like what you might see on the New York Times, for example, or sort of some of the ABC, the really long ones that I don't remember what they're called, but they often scroll down the page and they have images all in the backgrounds and everything. That's a whole separate style. So I feel like creatively, I don't have the time that I used to be able to write. But when it comes to academic writing and news writing, I've significantly improved because I'm doing that much more of it, to the point where it's fairly second nature for me to now look at a story, look at something and go, I know what the 3 sentences I need to write are to put this on the radio, or I know just instinctively how to get it out there to be a written news piece. I hope that answered the question. I hope that hasn't, made anyone feel really discouraged about writing if they don't have the time. I do still write creatively. It's usually just when I'm on a long drive as a passenger, I'll get suddenly struck by inspiration and just write until no more words come, and then I'll come back to that later.
I guess a follow-up to that would probably be, for both of you, how do you balance having to do any form of writing, whether it be emails, which I know a lot of us hate anyway, or research or anything for work, with your creative or academic writing that you do outside of work, in terms of finding a balance between wanting to write when you get home, but still being really tired because all you've done at work that day was write?
Maybe Prash can answer this one.
Yeah, okay. It's very interesting, Chloe. I generally try to keep the weekends as free as possible. That I'm just, we have 2 bunnies who need constant attention, and they're very adorable. So I spend a lot of my time just with them, or I'm catching up on movies or friends. So I try to have that weekend of just like not doing anything. And it has helped a lot, because then what happens is, come Monday to Friday, I know that, okay, I need to work on this or whatever the plan may be. In terms of balancing, for me, it's more to do with the topic or the idea that I want to work on. So, for example, this year, the goals that I had, there were a couple of people who asked me to review their books, and the last one just came out last weekend, and that's done for the year. So I don't have any book reviews to write or things like that. The other thing that I'm doing is I'm working on a story, not really a story, or sort of, let's say, a narrative. One of my students back in Fiji, he said to me, he said, you finished a PhD, can you write about how you went on doing a PhD? So it's not anything technical. It's nothing to do with what a PhD entails or things like that. It's just telling a story, moving from Fiji, coming to Armidale, what happened, how did it go about? So that it was a topic someone else gave, but it was so interesting because I thought, oh, I would never have written about what I did by myself, but he gave it. So I kind of like owe it to him to now start off to plan. So if you look at my research, whatever research I have done for this year, it's done. Whatever will happen now will come to 2026. But because this particular topic has come, so that has taken priority over any other topics that has come. So that's how I generally balance it. I feel I really need to write. But in the middle of writing all of this, there was an article that was published in one of the local dailies in Fiji that talked about the Higher Education Commission, they're investigating people who had got fake PhD qualifications. And a colleague of mine and I left all that I was doing, the research work or writing work, and we just worked on this particular newspaper article to write off and tell people about or expose what a fake PhD is when a new one is. So it's just the topic and the urgency of it that takes over anything else. That's what I can add to that.
Thank you. Do you have anything to add, Ash? You've written a few things for work and still somehow managed to do some creative writing, I think.
Mostly, yeah, we'll say that. I think it's really about finding a strategy and a time management system that works for you. I think, Prash mentioned it earlier. It can be as simple as, setting yourself a goal of 20 words a day and expanding it out to 200 words a day. If you're really dedicated to continuing to do it, finding that balance is going to look different for everyone. For some people, it might just be, they'll take the weekend off or they'll write 500 words of an evening. And for some people, it might be, I need to specifically take a day off work to recharge and then do this. I know for me, I'm pretty bad about the time management when it comes to finding time to write my own things. And I think that's just the nature of having a full-time job. Some people are lucky enough to have writing as their full-time job, in which case, they kind of have a much stronger incentive to be sitting there writing up to, 2,000 words a day if they have to. Whereas for other people, it's something that they do for fun. So I guess I don't really have any actual helpful advice, except to say that if you can't find that balance easily, you're not the only one who's struggling. It can be difficult in this day and age.
Thank you both so much. I'm going to disappear so that other people can ask questions.
Thanks, Chloe.
Thank you, Chloe. Are there any other questions from our audience? Casey.
I'm so sorry. Every time that you guys keep talking, I'm like, oh, I need to ask another question. I've just thought of this other thing. But Prash, this question just goes to you. I wanted to talk in an academic kind of context. When you're kind of coming to the end of the article, when you come to the discussion about what you've found and what the results have been and what it kind of looks like, is there room to kind of weave the passionate and the emotive kind of what you feel about what you found and what it means into that kind of thing? Or does it kind of solely revolve around data and results and the facts of it? What is the kind of balance?
Absolutely, you can do that. So especially and I think you have already got this very nice structure in mind, which is excellent, Casey. So when you come to the discussion, yes, you can be very passionate about the topic and you can talk as much as possible because you are the one who has done the research. You're the one who has worked with participants or worked with collaborators in coming up with that research topic or doing the investigation. So you have as much knowledge as required. The reviewers are not the expert in your topic generally, they're expert in the field, but you have come up with that, so you can be as passionate as you like. So the only thing that sort of differs in that one is when you're passionate about something and you'll say that his hair was so lovely that you fell in love with his hair. But in this article, in the academic context of that, to try and say that it was really good, you'd use some different terms to say. For example, you'll say the first language should be brought into the classroom because it plays such a vital role into that. So sort of, it's just the language that you're using, but it clearly shows that you are very passionate about the language context of it. So you have room for that to do, definitely. One of the things that this might sort of go off your question, but one of the things I find I'm always sort of going into something different. So writing something different. So at the moment, I'm looking at life writing. And what I did, I started looking at books available that could actually teach me how to go about life writing. So 5, 6 years ago, when I was working on my PhD, I bought books that were looking at academic writing, or they were looking at just focusing on how to write a PhD thesis. So every time I move to a different genre, I try and find something that can help me to sort of look at the resources that are available or help my understanding in all of that. So if you're very passionate about that, you can of course get in touch with me offline, and I can suggest you some very good books that can help you in terms of writing. Just on the top of my head, Massey University has got a very good website that talks about publishing papers. So if you are interested, if anyone is interested, they can have a look at Massey University, New Zealand, and go under their assignment resources, and you'll find there is a whole link that talks about journal papers from the beginning till the end. So it tells you what a journal paper in terms of introduction needs to be, methodology needs to be, because they're very different when you look at a thesis and a journal article. A thesis can go on for 50,000, 60,000, 100,000 words, but a journal paper is very concise. That 80,000 needs to now be only 4,000 words. So it's resources like this one that I always send to students, and I always say if they have a look at Massey University's one, it would be fantastic. So.
Thank you very much. That's a fantastic answer. Just as a follow-up question to that, this is sort of more oddly specific, but in the work that you've done, particularly focused on education inequality, do you find that, like, I was wondering if you could kind of talk about the impact of when people don't have access to literature and access to being able to write and access to kind of publish, like, what does that look like in a real setting? Like, what is the impact on people in that kind of way?
I think you are diving deep. I think you're diving deep into my PhD now. but it was a very interesting. When you talked about what it looks like in real context, I'll give you some narratives. One of the ones I remember interviewed a participant, and he is now a teacher. But when I asked him to talk about his primary school, and I talked about the library, he said, sir, when I went to school, I can recall from grade 2 the number of books that were in the library, and he could count 10 books. And he said, when I left after 8 years of primary school, 7, 8 years, he said those were the same 10 books that were there the entire time he was in primary school. He said there was no movement, nobody decided to donate books, and the school didn't feel like they had to buy books to, build a library or things like that. So on the ground, these things were so frightening to hear or frightening to listen to, the kind of things that they were. And there was a huge concern about distribution of resources in terms of that. So for example, students were telling me that they would come from the same area, but one school would have more resources, the other school had less resources and things like that. But if I go deeply into that, that will be sort of very off topic. So I'll try and not go into that. But again, if you drop me an email, I can send you some articles, or I can send you theses and stuff like that.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. That's fantastic.
Brilliant questions. Thank you, Casey. Once again, if anyone has any other questions, feel free to come forward to the pink square at the front of the room. While we're here, I did want to ask a little bit more about some of the specific work that our panelists have done. So Prash, your second book was actually published recently, Writing and Publishing in Fiji, Narratives from Fijian Writers, edited alongside Vinesh Maharaj. Can you tell us about the narratives there and how your background as a Fijian informs your kind of relationship with writing and maybe even your style of writing?
And so I'll give you a little bit of context to that. What happened was Vinesh actually worked at the University of the South Pacific Press. So University of the South Pacific is there are about 12 member countries to this university, all Pacific Island countries. And then they had a press going, and Vinesh was one of the people who walked in that. And he and I had a conversation after Fiji Writers Association had a meeting back in 2017. And he and I sat together and we said, well, let's try and work on something where we get emerging writers as well as those who are established writers together to tell us about how they started writing. Some of the questions that you have talked about today, Jake, were part of what that book was about. And there's a very interesting interview between an established South Pacific writer, Subramani. He and I sat together and had a conversation. All of this is included in the book. So we were very lucky in terms of getting the authors there. Some of the authors are, for example, Satyendra Nandan is a well-known writer in the South Pacific. His books are actually used in schools, so his books have been translated into so many languages. And he had contributed two chapters in this book that we edited. We had another economist who actually has been writing newspaper articles, and he had worked in the publishing industry for a long time. So he was able to contribute to the book as well. And on top of that, I had a number of people who had just published a poetry or had published a book chapter somewhere, but they came to tell their story in this. And it's very interesting to read their narratives, how they came about with it or what came about and they decided to publish it. And there was one particular person, she wrote about the first piece that she wrote, but she put so much passion into that. I think, Casey, you would enjoy reading this one because she put so much passion into telling just how she got to write this story. And I thought it was very interesting. And Vinesh, so he actually approached me last year and he is thinking that we might have a second edition of that come about. So we might be doing that. But one of the things that, Jake, I didn't get a chance to sort of mention at the beginning, and if we have time, I can just sort of go on a little bit. And I think it would be interesting for others to listen to this part of it, is that it doesn't matter how much you have written or how much you're getting about, you will always have people criticizing. So I'll tell you two stories. One of the universities I worked for back in Fiji, we had published, I had solely published a newspaper article. It was talking about intellectuals in Fiji. And this paper, I had pasted on the notice board. First day it was there. Second day I came, someone had torn it off. So I went to a professor and I said, oh, someone tore off the paper. And he said, okay, well, put more staple pins and put it back there. So I went and I put it back again. And third day I come, again, someone had torn it. So it made it very clear that and all the other articles were there, pasted very nicely. So I said, someone told to me, yes, you have people who dislike your work. People don't like because you're writing the truth or whatever it may be. But that's not something that should stop you. And I didn't stop at that. I just took it as a motivation to sort of be more in people's faces. And that gave sort of a lift to start publishing more. And I remember there was an associate professor who used to circulate articles, his articles that were in the newspaper, and he would never write a sentence to say, dear all or dear colleagues, I'm sharing my article. He would just paste it and send it. And Chloe mentioned about writing to write emails. I was so frustrated with this particular associate professor that he was sending in thinking that we are just whatever and we will read whatever we like. So I wrote an email to him and I copied everyone. Intentionally, I copied the whole university. And I said to him, he was a professor of meteorology. And I said, I'm very selective of what I read, and I have no interest in knowing about the cyclone's eye. So please, if you could remove me from this list, it would be appreciated. And he got wild, of course, as I was expecting. But I told him at the bottom of the email, please refrain from replying to this email. It will go to my junk email. And of course, it caused fury. And he wrote an email, of course, replied all and copied the dean and everybody and called me a failed writer. 2 years down the path, he lost his job, not because of that, but because he was not a competent person. And then after that, 10 years later, I've got 4 books to my name. So people are there, they will criticize and they will not like you, but it doesn't mean that you stop. You just keep on going.
Amazing. Very, very inspirational words. Definitely can relate to the people always wanting to criticize aspect. Ash, I wanted to focus on your short story, The Boy and the Witch, which we've spoken about. It was published in An Unexpected Party. An Unexpected Party is an anthology that focuses on queer speculative fiction. What makes these kinds of anthologies with a focus on diversity like this so important, not only to you, but in general?
I think there's two layers to this. The first is that this anthology specifically was for emerging writers of queer identities. So it was one of the few anthologies, and this is why breaking into traditional publishing is so hard, right? You sort of need to know, there's a little bit of nepotism. You kind of need to know someone. You sort of need to be known. But if you are within, I think it's the first 5 years of your craft, or you've only published 1 to 2 things, you're classified as an emerging writer. And that's got nothing to do with age necessarily. So this was an anthology that was specifically for queer identities and queer stories by emerging writers. So it actually gave people like myself and a lot of the other authors that ability to get their name out there and get their stories out there. This was a YA specific, so young adult specific anthology, which adds the genres a little bit different. But I find that as a queer person, it's really, really hard to actually find books in the genres that I like to read that have characters I can relate to on that level. I mean, I don't have to, the character doesn't have to be queer for me to relate to them, but it really helps. So off the top of my head, I can think of maybe 3 books that I've really, really connected to in the style and genre that I like to read. Now, I really like speculative fiction, so science fiction, fantasy, things like that. Queer stories tend to get shoved into LGBTQ, which is not really a genre, it's a tag, or they tend to get aimed specifically at a younger audience, so, the YA crowd, as they call it. But when you don't see yourself in literature, when you don't see yourself in books, in writing, in films and movies, it is not only incredibly alienating to you as an individual, it's also contributing to the continued otherness of people like you. Because media shapes how we think, it shapes our perceptions of the world around us, it shapes how we engage with other people and other forms of media as well. So you see it a lot with, and I'll talk about a genre that I'm fairly familiar with, like fantasy. There's a lot of Orientalism in really old fantasy novels. And there's also a lot of homophobia as well. Villains who are masculine tend to be fairly effeminate. If you look at Dune and some other novels as well, some of the villains are just straight up gay and then depicted as being predators, which really speaks to the time that they were being written in. So having anthologies like An Unexpected Party and other magazines and journals and even other novels that are coming out these days that are giving characters the ability to be bisexual, be queer, be transgender, be gender fluid, be whatever that isn't the cookie cutter, straight white, cishet norm. It teaches kids that it's okay if they're feeling this way. It gives them positive role models to look up to. And it also gives kids and other people as well who maybe don't see people like this in their day-to-day life, presents them as characters who are seen potentially, hopefully, as being relatable or someone to care about, and it really adds to that normalization of it. If you're just reading books that just have the same character styles over and over and over again, you kind of start to believe that the world's just made up of these types of people, when that's not true. So if you can expand that, I think it goes a long way to improving mental health and improving representation, but also improving the way that different communities, diverse communities, are treated and respected in society at large.
Thank you very much, Ash. Very a great answer. Do we have any more questions from the audience for either of our panelists? If not, last questions, speak now or forever hold your peace. If you do have any final questions, feel free to come on up to the pink square. Other than that, I will kind of wrap this up in a neat bow, and then we may have an opportunity for more casual conversations with our panelists as we wrap up tonight. But I want to, first of all, thank both Ash and Prash for joining us. It's been absolutely fantastic to get your expertise, your thoughts, your opinions, and that I'm sure has been very valuable for everybody in this room. We do quickly have to announce our November Writing Month winner. So we held a competition, as I'm sure everyone is aware, over November Writing Month. If you completed your writing goal over the course of the month, you would go into the draw to win. And I have been informed by our lovely draw assistant that the winning student was Casey Morgan. Congratulations. So Casey, we will get in contact with you to make sure that you get your prize. Once again, any last questions at all for either of our panelists? Okay. Once again, thank you to both of our panelists. Thank you for everybody who came along. Feel free to mingle, come and ask questions if there's a question that you want to ask one of our panelists one-on-one that you just didn't want to put out there for everybody to see in the recording and in this public space. Absolutely feel free to come and have a chat. And thank you everybody for coming along. I hope that this was informative and a lot of fun for you as well. And thank you to everyone who participated in November Writing Month. We've had a lot of fun with it.
Thanks for having me, Jake.
Thanks, Jake. And special mention to my friend Nick Troon from Clubs and Societies for reaching out. I hope he might be listening. So hi, Nick. Thank you.
We love you, Nick. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Once again, feel free to mingle and ask any questions if you have questions that you'd rather ask in a one-on-one context. And we will, I'm sure, be hosting plenty more events like this again soon. So stay in touch on the Digital HQ.